I'm a threat intelligence engineer at ThreatQ. Thank you for joining today. Today's webinar is about ThreatQ. We'll start by showing you a few slides just to explain the high-level overview of how our platform works, and then I will drill into a few demonstration use cases to show you actually how not only the platform works, but how it can work in operation with third-party technologies as well. Now, if you have any questions, please feel free to raise them on the questions panel on your webinar. Alternatively, at the end, I will stop for any questions if people would like to ask them over this forum. Okay, so let's start out with the high-level overview. ThreatQ has a threat library, an open exchange, and an adaptive workbench. Now, the idea behind each one of these components is they allow the ingestion of threat intelligence, the ability to nurture and score and aggregate threat intelligence into one location, and the ability to then leverage that threat intelligence with third-party technologies. Now, on the left here, you see the sources of threat data that we can bring into the platform. So ThreatQ has 93 open source feeds available out of the box today, and 34 commercial feeds. Now, with the open source intelligence feeds, you can actually turn those on as soon as you start the product. With the commercial feeds, you have to provide your own subscriptional information. So that might be for something like CrowdStrike or iSight or any of your preferred threat intelligence feeds. Moving down, we have the private industry and the sharing platforms. Now, these two go very much hand in hand. On the private industry side, this is any kind of government certs that you might want to pull threat intelligence data from, but it could also include information sharing communities as well, something like FSISAC, the retail ISAC, and so on. Now, we have the ability to import and export threat data directly from those particular sharing platforms, from those feeds, should I say. But if you prefer to leverage a sharing platform, something like MISP, we can work with those too. So we can integrate with either directly with the third-party sharing platform via Styx Taxi, or we can work with via a sharing platform like MISP. And the final thing here is that we also offer internal threat intelligence feeds as well. Now, this is a really interesting component of this platform in the sense that you're bringing a lot of threat intelligence data in from third-party sources. Being able to correlate that threat intelligence data with data that you are seeing from within your own infrastructure, your own environment, means that all of a sudden that threat data becomes more relevant and more contextually valuable to you as well. Now, I will actually show you an example of this during the demonstration in a few minutes' time. So once we bring threat intelligence data into the platform, and incidentally that can be either structured or unstructured data, we then aggregate, score, normalize, and enrich. And the way we do that is we bring it into our adaptive workbench. Now, the adaptive workbench has the threat library, which is a single intricate data model that models things like indicators, events, adversaries, signatures, and files, and builds relationships between those component pieces. Now, when we bring threat intelligence data into the platform, we aggregate that threat intelligence data into a single model. And that allows us to have a single location for you to go and reference a threat intelligence indicator, look it up, and really start to understand not just the relevance of the indicator based on all the sources of threat data you bring into the system. Now, to achieve that, we normalize the threat data into this data model. Now, during the normalization process, we will also score that data. ThreatQ has a user-definable scoring algorithm, which I will show you as part of version 3. And this scoring algorithm allows you to place certain weights on the indicators that are coming into the system. Now, that might be something like an indicator type, it might have an adversary attribution, it may even be a specific source or set of sources that you'd like to prioritize. The final thing that we offer here is the ability to enrich the data. Now, depending on which threat intelligence sources you leverage, some of those sources will be very rich, others might be less so. So we offer you the ability to leverage operations. Now, these are data enrichment capabilities that can go out to third-party sources like VirusTotal or domain tools, but can also come to internal sources as well. So, for example, a big data analytics platform. You might have a dynamic analysis engine that you'd like to leverage, something like Cisco ThreatGrid or Palo Alto Wildfire. The final piece here is that we also allow you to ingest data from third-party technologies. So far I've talked about technical indicators, but you can also use ThreatQ to ingest human intelligence. You can ingest information from email, mailboxes, etc. Now, once we've incorporated all of this threat intelligence into the platform, we start to build relationships between each of those pieces of threat intelligence. And that gives us a scored set of threat intelligence that we can then leverage. So to make the most out of this threat intelligence, we actually have something called the Open Exchange. The Open Exchange allows bidirectional integration with a range of different components. And some of those components are listed down the right-hand side. The Open Exchange itself has an API, a Python-based SDK, and an exporting capability. The exporting capability uses Smarty PHP templating and allows you to define exports in any format that you'd like. Now let's take a look at some of the things on the right-hand side here, these components we can integrate with. So first of all, we've got the concept of the sensor grid. ThreatQ can create signatures and rules from the threat intelligence data that we bring into the platform. Those signatures and rules can either be manually created and manually dropped onto a target device like a firewall or an IPS system, or you can automate the process and pass that data out directly. This gives us the ability to do two things. First is that we can be reactive. So if there's a particular threat that we are seeing within our infrastructure and we have rules or signatures associated with that particular threat, we can tell ThreatQ to deploy those rules or signatures to the protective security technologies that we have. But equally, it allows us to be proactive too. So if you have a colleague within the industry that is seeing activity from a particular adversary, or your information sharing community is talking about the same thing, you can actually look up that adversary or that indicator within the ThreatQ platform and look to see whether or not we have any rules associated with that. It could be something like beaconing or connectivity checks. Now, the beauty of this is that you can deploy these rules as a detection style rule, and that allows you hopefully to detect adversary activity earlier in the kill chain and ultimately gives you the opportunity to respond to it sooner. Moving down, we have the SOC and the SIM. These two go hand in hand. The SOC analysts, these individuals can actually log on to the system, they can look at ThreatQ through its GUI and use that to look up specific indicators, do research and collaborate with not just colleagues within their team, but also with incident responders or even the threat and vulnerability management teams, which you'll see me talk about in a few minutes. Now, to make the analysts' lives easier, we actually have the ability to automate correlation between a filtered set of threat data that you define from ThreatQ and the normalized fields from the events coming into your SIEM. I will show you an example of this capability using Splunk in a few minutes' time. Now, one of the other benefits here is that we start to build feedback loops. So not only are we pushing threat data out from ThreatQ, but we're also pulling the results of those correlations back into ThreatQ and using that to enhance what we know about particular indicators and threats and adversaries, etc. Moving down, we have the threat and vulnerability management teams. ThreatQ has the ability to model threats within its infrastructure. You can relate adversaries and indicators, files, signatures, and many other things together so that you can then start to build a picture of a given threat or campaign. Now, on top of that, we have the incident response capabilities too. Now, incident response capabilities allow you to use a ticketing system, for example, something like Resilient. Now, the beauty of doing that is that when you add a new ticket into the platform, what you can then do is you can have it automatically populate the ticket with what you already know about that particular indicator or set of artifacts within a ticket. On top of that, we allow incident responders to get access to much more detailed levels of information from the ThreatQ platform. So things like hashes, SSD, etc. So this is an overview of the platform. Now, what I plan to do next is I will actually show you a few examples of these particular integrations in action through our actual platform itself. So we start out by logging into the ThreatQ platform. Now, let me just set the activity here. Okay. So what you're presented with is a set of dashboards. Now, this is a new capability that's available in version 3. Now, these dashboards are split into widgets, and you'll see that we have 3 different widgets available within this screen. The first one is our Intelligence by Score widget. Now, this particular widget has the ability, uses our scoring mechanism to separate out indicators into specific groups. And you can click on any one of these scores to drill down and see all of the indicators, adversaries, and other such information associated with that score. Down at the bottom here, we have our incoming intelligence capability. Now, our incoming intelligence capability allows us to see which feeds are actively bringing threat intelligence into our infrastructure, whether or not any of those feeds are unable to pull data in, any issues that we might be seeing with those feeds. And then finally, on the right-hand side here, we have a watch list capability. Now, you'll notice over the top here that we actually have 5 different categories for watch lists. What a watch list allows you to do is you can watch a specific adversary, file, event, indicator, or signature and track it on your dashboard for any changes. So in this particular case, you'll see me talk about Putter Panda a little bit later on. Now, as I click through this, you can see all the different pieces of activity that have taken place with this particular adversary over time. And the same thing applies with the indicators that we have here. Now, as I mouse over this, you'll notice that I can also click on any one of these indicators to drill down into it and get more detail. So let's start by talking about how we use some of this threat data. Now, the first thing to call out here is if I go into the indicators overview screen, you will see that we've got a range of different indicators within the platform. Now, each of these indicators are split up by different types. And furthermore, they are split up by individual statuses as well. Now, those statuses are customizable and they allow you to determine a degree of workflow within the platform if you like. Now, in this particular demonstration system, what we're actually doing is we are taking a list of the active threat intelligence indicators. These are the indicators that I've filtered and scored and done various other things. And we are sending it over to our Splunk infrastructure. Now, this can be any SIM that you like, incidentally, that you see here. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is that the threat intelligence data that is being brought into the system is being made available within the SIM itself. Now, there's a couple of things we can then start to do with that. So first of all, we've got some high-level information at the top here. All of it is you can drill down into. But as you go down, you start to see some more trending-based information. So at the top left here, you can see the top 10 indicators. These are the indicators that have come from ThreatQ and that have matched a normalized field from events coming into our SIM. I'll come back to this one in a few minutes' time. We've also got the top 10 matched feeds. So you'll notice here, these are all the different feeds that are providing threat data to ThreatQ that are most frequently matching with events from the SIM itself. And then finally, we have threats with known adversaries. So you'll notice here that we have individual indicators, we've got their sources, and if there are multiple sources, they are highlighted. But we've also got any attribution that might be associated with those indicators. Now, this attribution information, this adversary information, comes directly from ThreatQ. So obviously you can see that the threat data that we're providing allows you to start to really drill into those events, those normalized fields in events that you're seeing. Now, what you're seeing here automatically populates out when the events normalize. Now, the first thing to note here is that we've got a set of top 10 indicators, and you'll see what we're talking about this one at the top here, Anina2.net. When we get a correlation with a SIM platform, not only do we provide that information in the SIM for alerting purposes, etc., but we can also create a ThreatQ event which goes back to ThreatQ and can be used to enrich the quality of the threat data within the threat intelligence platform. I'll show you an example of that now. So any enrichments, any events, if you like, they come into our events dashboard. And here you can see that over the period of 10 or 15 days, we've had lots of different events coming into our platform. Now, these events are split up by different types. So, for example, you can see we've got some Splunk sightings here, the red triangles, sorry, the red diamonds. We've got some resilient tickets, the purple squares. We've got some malware information coming in from our threat grid appliance. We've got some watch lists, some information coming in from our intelligence mailbox, and so on. Now, we can filter all of these depending on our preference. But I'm going to actually select one of these and drill down into it to get more information, a Splunk sighting. Now, this Splunk sighting, you can see, came in at 10 minutes past midnight this morning. The first thing we have here is a set of attributes. Now, this attributes can be customized, but this is information provided back to ThreatQ from the SIM. But most importantly, here are all of the indicators that the SIM has matched using the threat data that we provided from ThreatQ. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is we've got a set of related indicators. We'll see when they were last reported, different types and different statuses. But we can take this one step further. We can actually drill into these indicators to get more information. So let's take a look at some of these indicators now and see how we can use this data in an investigation. The first thing to note here is that we have a range of attributes associated with this indicator. Now, if you look down the right-hand side, you'll see various sources for those attributes. So we've got some information from CrowdStrike, so we can see it's a high confidence and it's targeted. We've got some information from our threat grid appliance. We've got some information from FireEye, and we've got some information from our data enrichment capabilities, VirusTotal and Cisco Umbrella. So this gives us an overview of the type of information that we've been able to pull in from the third-party feeds. The next thing that we have here is you'll notice we have a score attached to this. Now, if you click on this little red flag here, you'll actually be able to see the influencers for the score. Now, in this particular case, we've got a very high score. And the reason for that is that we've got some attributes that we're looking for, and I'll drill into scoring in a minute. We've got some sources, and we can see that CrowdStrike, Splunk, Resilient, and ThreatGrid have all had matches with this particular indicator. That means that that has positively influenced the score. And we can also see that we've got an adversary associated with this particular indicator as well. Now, this warrants further investigation. So the next thing that we can do is look at related events. Related events are events that are coming in from third-party technologies, like the Splunk example I showed you earlier. So the beauty of this is that it then actually starts to make your threat intelligence data more relevant. And the reason for that is that this is now starting to show you where this particular indicator, Anina2.net, has been spotted or analyzed positively by any of the technologies that we're connected to within our infrastructure. So in this case, you can see I've had 4 individual Splunk sightings. I've got some positive results from ThreatGrid. I've even got a resilient ticket open about this. Now, we can click on this information and get more detail as and how we like. So in this particular case, I've drilled into the resilient ticket. And you'll notice here that the incident type is malware. It's currently active. And I've got a URL which I can simply copy and paste into my browser to go and actually look at the ticket directly myself. Now, first thing to do is when I log into this example, you'll see the ticket. And if I click on artifacts, you can see all the information that we have about this particular ticket. Now, notice here that if I click on any one of these indicators, let's, for example, take Anina2.net here, the first thing you'll notice is we are actually bringing the threat intelligence data from ThreatQ into the resilient platform. So we've got all of this useful data that you saw on my previous screen available to me within the ticket itself. Now this highlights one of the key features of ThreatQ. ThreatQ has the ability to enable you to leverage your own preferred tools and feeds. And you can use those technologies to interface with the threat intelligence data however you like. Now you could use it to interface directly through the GUI, or you could use, like in this example, Resilient, or my preferred third-party tool to do that. Now the interesting thing here is that it's more than just pulling data. If I select one of these indicators here, you'll notice we have the ability to do actions on ThreatQ. So we can look for additional indicators in ThreatQ. We can mark indicators as false positives. We can even add indicators back into ThreatQ from within this screen. Now going back to the ANINA 2 indicator here, we've seen so far that we've got some attributes that highlight that this might be malicious. We've seen it happening a lot within our own infrastructure, and we've got a high score. So we can go one step further. In some cases, feeds will actually provide you with files, and we download those files as part of our feed ingestion process. Now you'll notice that the file is now downloaded on the bottom left here. And I can actually open up that file from within my platform, and I'm now presented with the CrowdStrike intelligence report. Now, if I do my search here, you can see that I've now got a reference to ANINA2.net, so I can read around it and understand how that particular indicator may well affect my particular organization. On top of that, we've got some threat grid information as well. Now, I'll come back to this in 2 seconds. Now, we've also got the ability to run operations on this data. This is our data enrichment capability. So for example, I could click on the VirusTotal link here, and I'll submit this indicator, ANINA2.net, to VirusTotal. It will then provide me back some information, which I can then read, and if I'd like to, I can then add that information into the platform. And I do that by simply selecting the various fields that I'd like to add, and clicking Add Indicators or Add Attributes as needed. Now, going back to the Splunk example from earlier, we can also do things like we can look up where we've seen this indicator, what the logs say in our SIM. Now, in this case, it's Splunk, but it could be QRadar, it could be McAfee ESM. It really does depend on your own system. Now, in this case, you can see all of the logs that have come back from my SIM infrastructure. Now, the other thing you'll notice here is I also have the ability to submit this indicator to my threat grid appliance. Now, as soon as I click that submit button, I can now view that indicator. Apologies, it's pre-logged in. Right, here we go. I can actually view the detonation of that indicator taking place within my threat grid appliance. Now, this will come up, and there you go. So you can see it's now started to go through the detonation process. Now, once the detonation is complete, we'll then receive any updates from that detonation into our information about ANINA2.net. Now, obviously, in order to receive this information, it has to be above a certain score, something that you can define. Now, we can do 2 things with this. The first of all is that we can actually get the results of the detonation for viewing. So if I fire this up here, you'll actually see the analysis report from the detonation. This is pulled into the infrastructure. We've also got the malware sample here. And if I click on the malware sample, you'll notice we've got a malware safety block enabled. That ensures that we don't accidentally open up this file and so on. Now, the final thing to call out here is that we've got a set of related indicators, and we've got a set of related adversaries as well. Now, we can click on any one of those related indicators or adversaries to get more information about a particular, whatever we're clicking on. So in this case, I've clicked on Putter Panda, which is an associated adversary. Now, the first thing you'll notice here is that we model the adversary as well. So you can see, for example, that we've got countries, we've got websites, and you can add your own information in here. You can manipulate it however you like. We've got an adversary description, and again, we've got a web page here that we can click on and open to get more information about the adversary, as you can see here. We've also got a set of related adversaries as well. So you can not only can you associate an adversary to a given indicator, but you can relate adversaries together as well. Moving down, we have a set of comments here. So we can actually leverage this capability within adversaries, indicators, whatever we like. The beauty of doing this is it means that you can then start to collaborate. For example, if we've seen this particular adversary before, as a SOC analyst, I can come into the platform and look for how have we seen this adversary before? What action was taken by our incident response team to resolve? Those types of things. I can even add in my own comments as well, should I so wish. Now, the final thing to note here is that we also have the ability to store signatures, and I mentioned this at the outset. Now, in this particular case, you can see that we've got 4 signatures that have come in from our CrowdStrike threat intelligence data feed, and these are snort signatures. Now, if I click on any one of these signatures, I can then drill down into the signature, and I can see the full snort signature that's available here. Now, we store a range of different signatures, signature types. We store snort, suricata, OpenIOC. But not only that, we can actually create our own signatures and output formats as well. And we do that using our exports capability. So you'll notice here that I've now drilled into our exports capability. There's different ways that we can leverage exports. We can use exports to send data out to a third-party SIEM, for example. Let's take a drop into this ArcSight one. You'll notice here that it's being created in a common event format. But also, we can use it to create rules. So if I click on the source via domains example here, you'll see that we're actually creating source via rules from the threat intelligence that's within the platform. Now, the beauty of this capability is that we use something called Smarty PHP templating, which allows us to introduce our own output formats depending on our preferred export template. Not only can we do that, but we can also define special parameters. Now, those parameters allow us to filter the data. For example, we could say we're only interested in active indicators that are of the type email or IP address. We can even filter data by score. So we can say I'm only interested in data that has above a certain score. Now, talking of scores, let's actually drop into our scoring capability. So you'll notice earlier that I showed you the scoring capability and how it influenced an indicator's score. ThreatQ constantly evaluates the scores of its indicators. What that allows us to do is that if something changes relating to a specific indicator that is an influencer that is used to influence score, then the score will be automatically adjusted accordingly. So a great example of that is here. So you'll notice earlier when I logged into Resilient, I had the ability to mark something as a false positive. If I was to mark that thing as a false positive, the first thing that would happen is the indicator in ThreatQ would be marked as a false positive with this attribute key value pair. Now, as soon as ThreatQ detects this attribute, it then automatically reevaluates the score of that particular indicator. And in this case, it will drop the score. Now, you can actually adjust these weightings depending on your preference. And we have 4 different methods of adjusting scores and weightings within our infrastructure. So the first of these is indicator type. And you'll notice here within our indicator type, we have the various different indicator types within our platform. We have indicator sources, and again, you can adjust the sources depending on your preference. You might prefer some indicators sources over others. We have the ability to look for specific attributes. So, for example, here we talked about resilience. We can also talk about the CrowdStrike threat type or confidence. So you can mine the threat intelligence data coming in from your sources for the specific attributes that you care about. And then finally, we have adversary relationship. Now, you'll notice we've got any adversary set here, but you can set any adversary you like. You can be very specific about it. So you can look for if there's an adversary concerning you, or you find out from a third party that you need to focus on a particular adversary, or you do so from your own research. You can look at that adversary up in ThreatQ. You can determine which adversary it is and then change your scoring. Automatically, ThreatQ will then adjust its scoring, rescore all its indicators, and the results will be presented to you. The final thing to talk about here is the ability for automatic expiration. So we also have the ability to adjust how indicators are expired within the platform. And this can be done based on the feeds. And furthermore, you can put specific exceptions in depending on your preference. For example, you might choose to expire in IP addresses sooner than you expire URLs. So I've talked a lot about ingesting threat intelligence through the traditional sources. What I'd like to do now is show you our ability to import both structured and unstructured data using a slightly different approach. Now what I'm actually going to do here is I'm actually going to browse on my own system for a specific file, and I'm going to use this DryDex McAfee Labs file that you see here. The first thing you'll notice here is that it's a PDF file. So I can tell ThreatQ what type of parser to use, and you'll notice we've got different types of parser here. We can look at specific sticks formatted files, we can look at XML files, etc. And when I hit next step, what then happens is that ThreatQ uploads that file to its internal system. We then have a choice. We can choose to save the file. If we do, it will be available to us in the same way that the CrowdStrike intelligence report was earlier on today. Or alternatively, we can choose to delete it. Now in this case, I'm going to delete it because I'm just interested in the indicators that actually come from the source material. Now I can put some information in here, so I can say it's from McAfee. I can put a status in here, so how much do I trust the input? Do I want to review it first perhaps? I can even put in my own attributes that I'd like to attach to it. For example, I could attach the attack phase, that could be the diamond model or the kill chain, depending on your preference. Now, as soon as I hit next step, what then happens is ThreatQ uses the parser that I selected earlier, and it then identifies a set of potential indicators that are candidates for import in that document. Now, we present the original document on the left-hand side here, and all of the possible indicators on the right. Now, depending on the parser that you use, some parsers will be more accurate than others. For example, if you use the sticks parser, which is obviously a structured data format, we'll get a much more accurate level of output. Whereas if you use something a little more unstructured like this, we'll still get responses, but we'll have to spend a little bit more time evaluating and reviewing those responses. So in this particular example, you can see that we've got some links to McAfee. So I can simply select those links, and I'm going to choose to delete these, and hit the delete button. Now this will remove them from the import process. In some cases, I might want to know a little bit more about a particular indicator before I choose to import it. So I can click the little icon here, and it will then take me to the location in the document where this IP address is mentioned. That allows me to read around it and make sure that it is a viable candidate for import. Now, the other thing that I can do here is if I see something that I'd like to add that hasn't been picked up by the parser for some reason, I can simply copy it, tell ThreatQ to add it by pasting the value, telling it what type of indicator to add, and hitting the Add Indicator button. And there you go. You can see that that particular indicator I've just added has now been added into the import process. Now, on top of that, we can also start to do add additional pieces of information in. So, for example, you can add your own attributes, you can set statuses, you can even set relationships. So if I was, for example, knew that this was associated with a Putter Panda adversary, I can type that in and then start to relate that into the data set. I can apply a confidence, I can put a comment, and then I can create that relationship. Now, ThreatQ will allow you to relate any part of its data model with this in this import process. So that could be an event, it could be an adversary, a file, or a signature. Now, once I've gone through the process of evaluating this entire list, I can then hit Finish Import, which will take all of these indicators, upload them to the platform, and they'll then be available for use. I'm going to abandon that for this stage. Okay. So that was a very quick overview of ThreatQ's threat intelligence platform. I'm going to stop there and ask and pass it out to any questions if people have any. Are there any questions at all, please? Okay. That was the end of the webinar today. If you do have any questions, then please do not hesitate to raise them or let us know. We will send out a recording of the webinar if you'd like to look at it in future. But all that remains is for me to thank you for your time today and have a great day.
Steve, excuse me, there is a question from Bashar Kadani, I think. I will unmute Bashar.
Sure, go ahead.
Bashar, you can speak.
Hi, thank you very much for the presentation. I have some questions about the presentation, just about the confidence. How do you calculate them? I don't know if you mentioned how you do calculate the confidence in each indicator, but could you please be more precise?
Sure. So, were you referring to the score there? The
No,
scoring
not
case.
the score. No, not the score. The confidence. I think it's associated, but
Okay, yes. So the confidence, let me drill into an indicator here, and we can use that as an example. The purpose of confidence within our platform is for you to choose to add your own confidences in depending on your preference. This is not calculated as such by any algorithm. It is simply something that
okay,
you adjust depending on your
okay.
preference. The idea is this is part of the adaptive workbench. It's there to give you some tools to effectively promote or reduce the confidence of a particular adversary or indicator, whatever is associated with it, to meet your own specific needs.
Okay, you mentioned first. I want also to say that there's a huge difference between the actual version and the previous version. So then, thanks a lot for this improvement. There's in your first or second slide. There's two-direction relationship between SIEM, SOC, and all threat quotient platform. So the open exchange, yeah. So how do you facilitate this bidirectional relationship?
Okay, great question. So ThreatQ's, we call it the open exchange, but effectively what that is it is an API layer that sits on top of our on top of our database layer. Now, the idea here is that API layer is bidirectional. Now, we've got choices here. We can either use the API directly, it's a RESTful API, and that allows bidirectional integration. We can use the SDK, which is a Python-based SDK. Again, it allows bidirectional integration, but obviously simplifies some of the common API requests. Or you can use the export capabilities. Now, in the case of bidirectionality, there are two ways that we can go about achieving that. The first is we can go with a push type approach, push-pull type approach. So what that means is that we can actually have the third-party technology push information to an integration that will either sit on your ThreatQ server or its own dedicated integration server. Once it gets that information, it will then do some analysis on it, convert it into apply the necessary business logic, and then action the result on ThreatQ. Alternatively, you have the ability to configure pull-based integrations. Now, again, you'll have an integration that sits on the ThreatQ server or that sits on its own dedicated integration server, but instead of waiting for some communication from the third-party toolset, what it can actually do is go to the API of the third-party toolset, query it, pull back any necessary data, again, apply the business logic, and then push it into the ThreatQ platform. So the way we build bidirectional integrations is that we typically build them using their own dedicated integrations. ThreatQ has a range of different integrations that we offer today, and we're happy to provide those to our customers.
Okay, we had in the previous version some lack of documentation. I don't know if this, if using API REST and this bidirectional relationship, the open exchange is documented, or do you have some example? Or we were able to reach the APIs in the previous version, but if there's more documentation that could help us, it would be appreciated.
Absolutely, there is. With the version 3 release, we are significantly updating our documentation, and as part of that, you'll see much richer user documentation, including API documentation as well.
Perfect, thank you. I have just also a question about Cisco Umbrella. We had recently a new let's say proposal this editor, do you have integration automatically? So you have feeds inside them. Can you just explain a little bit more about using them?
Sure. So we have this concept of operations within our platform. Now,
Yes.
operation is twofold. You have a number of pre-canned or pre-built operations that are in the platform when you first install it. Now, those operations are things like virus total, domain tools, and emerging threats. But we also have the ability to develop our own operations, and it's something that we encourage our customers and partners to do on a regular basis. Now, we build operations on a regular basis for our partners and customers anyway, and as we start to build those out, we make those available. And in this particular case, the Cisco umbrella ones that you see here are an example of that. Now, the way this works is that not only can you use the pre-canned operations, but you can actually build your own operations into the platform. And the reason we do that is that it allows you to bring in data enrichment sources that perhaps aren't out of the box, but also it allows you to start considering data enrichment sources that are actually inside your own internal infrastructure. So, for example, if you wanted to use this platform to query a big data analytics tool, you could do that. Or you wanted to use it to submit data to a tool, you can do that as well. So operations is designed to use our open exchange to leverage a third-party data enrichment tool. The difference is you'll see it presented to you in this window. The final thing to call out is that operations are associated with certain types of indicators. They are effectively context sensitive. What that means is that an operation will only appear if it applies to a given indicator type. So in this case, you can see that this indicator type is an FQDN. Well, this particular FQDN has access to all of the different operations that you see here in this particular screen, whereas a slightly different indicator type might have a shorter list.
Okay. Thank you. The last question. We are trying to let's say respect diamond model. I don't know if you are aware of it. Yeah, so we find this the notion of this model in ThreatConnect, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Can we let's say adjust or rename maybe some I don't know, parameters or fields in order to find the four elements of the diamond model inside ThreatQuotient?
Yes, absolutely you can. So on the screen now, you'll see this concept of the attack phase. Now, at the moment, my particular system is based upon the traditional kill chain type model, but you can actually change this particular field's, the attack phase system, to reflect any model you like. In this case, to your point, the diamond model. Now, that will do two things. The first thing is that you can then have the platform apply and use those attack phases in appropriate places, and you can do that by manually adding in your own attributes or automatically adding them in using a what we call a bulk updater tool. The other way that the second part of this is that as soon as you start to change that attack phase concept, that will then represent itself in this graphing and some of the high-level reporting. So that means that you can come into some of this reporting and you can click on it and drill down into it to get more information. So for example, I've just drilled down into an example here, and you can see all of the different indicators that I've got back associated with that particular phase of the kill chain, in this case, action on objectives. Now, we can then start to do more and more clever things with the search. So once we've done that initial drill down, we can then start to add in additional parameters. So for example, I might choose to drill down further and add in any one of the parameters that you see on the left-hand side there. So I might say, I'm interested in any indicators that are from this stage of the attack phase, that they are host-based and that they have a score of greater than 10 or greater than or equal to 10. For example. So that allows us to really drill into and start to pull back the data. But the second part of that is that we can also do this thing called bulk changes. So you can build searches within the platform and pivot the data model to meet your needs. And then you can start to apply attributes to that data model. So for example, I could say in here, I want to bulk update all of my attributes in my search. And I'm using the kill chain here, but I can bulk update it with any information that I want. And equally, this could be an attribute from the diamond model as well. So yes, going back to your original question, yes, absolutely, we can manipulate our data model so that it will support the diamond model. Lots of different ways of achieving that, and obviously we can have a further conversation if you'd like.
I would really yeah, appreciate having another conversation on that. We are in this development, and if you could help us, it would be appreciated. Thank you.
Absolutely.
That's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you for the questions.
Steve,
No.
I think we have another question from Julien, who is online. I don't know if Julien is able to talk because he's there 4 times. So, Julien, can you speak? Okay. Otherwise, you can put your question. It's a question. So, for the bulk change, have you implemented more than 1,000 bulk changes? Is the question from Julien.
Okay, so at the moment our bulk changes system is designed to use, within the GUI, you can do it only on 1,000 at a time. We have a number of tools that are available to allow you to manipulate data in bigger volumes than that. We do that using the Open Exchange. Now, you can actually use this to your advantage. So, for example, if there are specific criteria that you want to look for, we have a bulk changes tool that allows you to plug in those criteria, and the system will then periodically run the bulk update tool to adjust the look for those criteria and then update those specific attributes with a set of changes that you'd like. Now you can also use this in a manual way as well, and that will give you a greater volume than 1,000. Okay. Any other questions at all, please?
So let me check. No, I think we're all fine.
Okay, well, so all that then remains for me to say is thank you to everybody who's attended the call today. I hope you found it of some use. We will share the recording with you, absolutely. And if you have any further questions or you think of any further questions following this call or would like to see specific aspects of the product in more detail, then please do not hesitate to get in touch with us. We'd be very happy to do so. Thank you very much for...
Wait, sorry, I've been very... Okay, so it's just thank you. Sorry, Steve, go ahead.
That was it, Celine. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you.